distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful for the kind invitation extended to me by Mr. Yannick Sani, the organizers of the London Business School Africa Business Summit, for the opportunity to speak on the platform of this institution, which has been responsible for producing many important men and women who are doing great things in their respective fields of endeavor across the world. Since becoming President of the Republic of Ghana some 16 months ago, this is the first time I've taken a few days off work. So understandably, the family is not too excited about my presence here because I'm supposed to be on vacation. Nonetheless, I had to come. I could not pass up the opportunity to participate in this summit and to be in the midst of so many people who are eager to discuss the future of Africa. I've taken the author's liberty to amend slightly my theme so that it reads, Scaling for Impact, the Important Role of Industrialization, as it reflects more fully the central focus of my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, 61 years ago, my country, Ghana, achieved independence from British colonial rule. She was the first Black African nation to do so. There were high hopes that this nation, at the time of some 6 million people, would make rapid progress and develop in the newly won atmosphere of freedom. And indeed, we appeared to do so. The enthusiasm of the people, the determination of our first Prime Minister, later to become President, Kwame Nkrumah, and the goodwill of the world carried us through the first few early years. It probably also had something to do with the fact that the newly installed government inherited from the departing colonial authorities a healthy amount of foreign exchange reserves, and there was virtually no external or domestic debt, and Ghana's population was some 6 million. There was the widespread belief amongst those leading the struggle for independence that political freedom would accelerate development, end poverty, and bring prosperity. Indeed, the campaign to get rid of the colonial authorities was firmly linked with the promise of development. The people being mobilized with the object of an improvement in the country's economic and social conditions. 1957, the year of our independence, was a long time ago, and I believe many in this audience were not around at the time. The vision of a progressive, prosperous Ghana, envisaged by our forebears, has not materialized. It is largely due to the continuous existence of a major piece of the colonial infrastructure in Ghana, as is the case in many countries on the African continent, and also to the systematic failure of governance that characterized the early decades of Ghanaian independence. Ladies and gentlemen, the structure of the economy bequeathed to us by the colonialists was aimed at servicing the needs of colonialism. Essentially, raw material exporting countries, economies, which imported manufactured commodities from the industries of the colonial power. Ever since the British governor of colonial Gold Coast, Sir Frederick Gordon Gaggisberg, left our shores in 1928, Ghana's economy, like that of many countries on the continent, has remained structurally rigid, depending largely on exports of primary commodities such as gold, cocoa, bauxite, and timber. Indeed, in 1928, 70% of our foreign exchange earnings were from gold, cocoa, and timber. In 2007, about 65% of our earnings were from these same three products. Data on the external sector indicate that total exports for 2017 were $13.75 billion United States dollars. Exports of crude oil fetched Ghana some $3 billion, Gold exports amounted to some $5.8 billion, and export of raw cocoa beans earned Ghana $2.7 billion. The exports of gold, cocoa, and crude oil alone account for 84% of Ghana's export earnings. We feel good when Ghana is praised for being the second largest producer of cocoa in the world. Touted as a leading producer of cocoa, gold, manganese, timber, and lately crude oil, has not done much to address the concerns of the hundreds of thousands of young men and women who do not have jobs. Even though the expansion of the economy over the last decade has brought about a marginally higher average per capita income, it is still limited in its capacity to generate decent jobs with decent pay for our youth. Together, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire account for 65% of the world's cocoa output. Ghana earned $2 billion United States dollars from the sale of cocoa beans in 2015, and Cote d'Ivoire $3.75 billion United States dollars, amounting together to $5.75 billion United States dollars. And yet, the chocolate market was worth some $100 billion plus dollars in 2015. It means that the farmers whose toil and sweat produce 65% of the world's cocoa earn 5.75% of the global value of their activity. Does it then come to us as a surprise that African youths do not see a future in their respective countries and are willing to cross the Sahara Desert on foot and drown in the Mediterranean Sea in a desperate bid to reach the mirage of a better life in Europe? With the majority of African economies dependent on the production and export of raw materials, who can blame them for wanting to leave? These economies cannot produce wealth and prosperity for the masses on the continent. It therefore drives the determination to seek a much better standard of living out of Africa, thereby fueling the refugee crises and the numerous counts of illegal migrations. As some of you may know, my route to the high office of President of the Republic of Ghana was not a smooth one. I was third time lucky. Touring the country on 3 separate occasions in my bid to become president opened me up fully to the demands of the people, whether it is about cost of education, bad roads, high cost of living, low retail sales. It all came down to one thing: we need good jobs with good income. We cannot continue traveling this worn path of limited success of being exporters of raw materials. Our problems require that we think outside of the box. Our thinking approach to solving problems must be different from the thinking and approach that brought about the problems in the first place. An expanded economy should not only mean having a wider variety of cheap imported goods to sell on our streets. An expanded economy should also mean an industrializing economy. Unless we industrialize with the goal of adding value to our primary products, we cannot create the necessary numbers of good-paying jobs that will enhance the living standards of the mass of our people. Raw material producing economies do not create prosperity for the masses. The way to that goal, the goal of ensuring access to prosperity, is value addition activities in a transformed and a diversified modern economy with a modernized agriculture. In other words, the industrial development of our economy, which takes on board the aid of digital technology. The story of Mrs. Esther Oklu, a celebrated pioneer female entrepreneur of our country, is one I want to share with you. It was back in 1942 that Mrs. Esther Oklu, at the time Esther Nkulenu, made her first few jars of marmalade. She had completed Achimota College and had been unable to find a job. Having picked up marmalade-making skills at Achimota, she used her pocket money to buy oranges, sugar, and firewood, and immediately made 100% markup on her marmalade. The rest, as the saying goes, is history, and as the Uklu's 12 jam bars turned into the internationally acclaimed Nkulenu Industries, constant companion of boarding school students, as producer of marmalade, orange juice, and palm concentrate. I like the Nkulenu story because she exemplifies the entrepreneurial spirit in the Ghanaian and is a classic case of how other nations started on the road to industrialization, food processing, and adding value to raw materials that are easily found around them. Some would say her business should be a large-scale enterprise by now, but nothing can take her pioneering status from her. And I'd like to say that even if Nkulenu Industries remained a cottage industry throughout the years, there's still a lot to learn from that. The leather industry in Italy, for example, a multi-billion-dollar industry that makes world-famous shoes, bags, belts, and other leather products, is run very much along the lines of a cottage industry by several families. But whether it is on a small scale or a large scale, industrialization can only be successful when the necessary infrastructure is available to make production processes and products competitive. The first order of the day is to get the fundamentals of the Ghanaian economy right. With some degree of success, we have put in place, since I took office, a monetary policy that has stabilized our currency and has reduced significantly inflation and the cost of borrowing. In addition to that, we've implemented a raft of tax cuts, which has brought some relief to businesses and at the same time reduced substantially our fiscal deficit, from 9.3% in 2016 to 6% in 2017. These interventions are lowering the cost of doing business and are shifting the focus of our economy from an emphasis on taxation to an expansion of production. Indeed, the Ghanaian economy, whose growth stood at 3.6% in 2016, the lowest in 2 decades, grew by 8.5% in 2017 and is expected to grow in 2018 by 8.3%, which according to the IMF would make it the fastest growing economy in the world this year. The relative success of the implementation of our business-friendly policies and the availability of affordable and reliable power has ensured industry, whose growth rate stood at negative 0.5% in 2016, grew by 17.7% in 2017, the highest sectoral growth in the economy. Industrialization can only be successful if we have a workforce that is equipped and skilled and can compete effectively on the global market. Any country that aims to transform itself into a modern, productive player in the global marketplace must get its educational policies right. The countries that have made rapid progress around the world put education at the heart of their development. In the mid-19th century, the United States of America began to transition to publicly funded high school education. It must have been a daunting prospect at the time, paying for the education of so many children for such an extended period of time out of limited public resources, transferring a potential workforce away from immediate productivity for an investment in like schooling. But the experiment paid off. America set herself up for 20th century success, creating a workforce fit for rapid economic development, which has inspired the emergence of the most powerful economy so far known to human history. Indeed, other nations which began their lives as independent states at the same time as we did, like Singapore, Malaysia, and Korea, have emulated a similar model and have also achieved great economic success. In fact, in their case, they followed Japan's excellent example. Ghana, under my leadership, is following suit. We're making sure that the Ghanaian child, through our free senior high school policy, gains access to a minimum of secondary school education. Already, the free senior high school policy, introduced for the first time by my government last September, has resulted in 90,000 more students gaining access to senior high school in 2017 than they did in 2016. We are of the firm conviction also that we shall be able to transform Ghana's economy and reduce unemployment when we pay attention to technical and vocational training. That is where the skills needed for the modern economy can be developed. Our strategy is to expand technical and vocational opportunities at both secondary and tertiary levels, and thereby strengthen the linkages between education, industry, and the world of work, as well as empower young people to deploy their skills to employ themselves and others. Ladies and gentlemen, as a relative new entrant in the League of Oil-Producing Countries, we have two options about what to do with the oil. One, to treat it like we have done with gold and allow it to be exported in its raw material form as crude. Or two, to use it as a perfect opportunity to transform the structure of our economy through industrialization and value-added commercial activities. My government is going to use our oil revenues to create assets, not waste it on consumption and accumulate debt, simply because people will lend us money now that we have oil. Our oil fields provide us with the perfect opportunity to create a petrochemical industry in Ghana. We began the processes leading to the setting up of a gas feedstock industrial estate in the western region of the country. We intend to convert our petrochemicals into hundreds of industrial and consumer products produced in Ghana, including plastics, paints, rubber, fertilizers, detergents, dyes, textiles, solvents, and hopefully bitumen for road construction. From the petroleum, we can get the preservatives to canned food produced in Ghana, and we can get biodegradable plastics in which to preserve the processed food. The synthetic byproduct from petroleum can serve as raw material for the manufacturing of different types of garments and footwear. We also have the opportunity to make Ghana a regional center for light manufacturing industry for a market of some 350 million people in the ECOWAS community, projected to reach 500 million by 2030. By weaving together our numerous natural resources like food produce, bauxite, iron ore, and gas, with our talents and energy to turn our nation into an economic powerhouse in West Africa, generating full employment for our teeming youth. In focusing on industrialization, we shall not overlook the need to transform agricultural output and productivity so that we can feed ourselves and generate the raw materials for industrial development. This is the reason for our program for planting for food and jobs. Last year, 200,000 farmers signed on to this program, which involves the provision by government of subsidized fertilizer, improved seedlings, and extension officers who would become a virtually extinct species to improve agricultural productivity and output. This year, the program is embracing 500,000 farmers. Our target is to cover 1 million farmers by the end of my 4 years mandate. The transformation in agricultural productivity and output we seek is becoming evident day by day. We cannot undertake this ambitious program of economic development without the supply of affordable and reliable power. The Ghanaian power sector, which was in the doldrums and led to the introduction of a new word in the Ghanaian lexicon, dumso, signifying erratic supply and constant outages, has now been reinvigorated. The debt overhang over the energy sector of some 10 billion Ghanaian cedis, the equivalent of 2.4 billion United States dollars, is being cleared. We've successfully issued 4.7 billion cedis in 7 and 10-year bonds to settle a portion of the 10 billion debt overhang. We're determined to settle the remainder of this debt very shortly. This step is extremely important, for it will enable more investments to be attracted into the energy sector with the goal of reducing the cost of energy. Indeed, we've begun to take steps to reduce the cost of energy. As from April this year, residential customers are enjoying a 17.5% reduction. Non-residential customers, such as tailors, fitters, barbers, hairdressers, carpenters, mechanics, electricians, plumbers, and chop bar operators, i.e. small businesses, have seen their electricity bills cut by 30%. The mining companies are now benefiting from a 10% reduction, while special low tariff customers, such as our manufacturing companies and industries, are also enjoying a 25% reduction. Long may it continue that our affairs are managed efficiently to enable relief to be brought to the Ghanaian consumer and industry. This process of structural transformation will be immeasurably aided by the successful implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which an overwhelming majority of African countries, including Ghana, recently signed in Kigali, in the Republic of Rwanda on 21st March 2018. 22 countries need to ratify it to bring it into effect. I'm happy to inform you that Ghana's Parliament ratified it on 26 April by strong bipartisan support. 2 days ago, Ghana and Kenya were the first African countries to deposit their instruments of ratification at the AU Commission headquarters in Addis Ababa. The success of the free trade area would mean that the era of low volumes of intracontinental trade that have defined the activities of African economies will come to an end. Up till now, trade between African regions has remained low compared to other parts of the world. In 2000, intra-regional trade accounted for 10% of Africa's total trade and increased marginally to 11% in 2015. Trading amongst members of the European Union, for example, amounted to 70% in 2015. An increase in intra-regional trade in Africa is the surest way to develop fruitful relations between our respective countries. It will mean a rapid increase in exchanges of our agricultural, financial, industrial, scientific, and technological products, which would enhance dramatically our attainment of prosperity and the prospects of employment for the broad masses of Africans, particularly our youth. Our economies would then be shaped not by the production and export of raw materials, but by the things we make. Ladies and gentlemen, after 25 years of stable and free democratic society, with a strengthening market economy, resource-ridden Ghana today has the best opportunity since independence to undertake a deliberate and meaningful transformation of her economic structure. As the experience of the successful countries in Asia and elsewhere have shown, in addition to creating an atmosphere for the private sector to thrive and create jobs, government has a very important and positive role to play in spurring industrialization and economic transformation. Government's business is to ensure that businesses are up and running and have access to the capital that will keep the wheels of industry moving. These are simple beliefs with profound implications. The challenge in Ghana is that we have not attracted as much foreign investment as we could have. In recent years, our dealings with foreign investors have not been as sure-footed as they could have been. And this has led to the many foreign-led, highly publicized projects that have not seen the light of day. There's a large proliferation of agencies and departments that local industries and would-be foreign investors have to deal with. We are taking steps to cut down on the bureaucracy. We've made a number of deliberate interventions to reduce the cost of doing business, reduce the stress associated with setting up businesses, and formalize the economy. The e-business registration system, the paperless port clearance system, the digital addressing system, the mobile interoperability system, and the national identification card system would all help quicken the pace of change to bring us into the technology-driven era and make our businesses competitive and thereby attract the requisite investment, foreign and domestic, to spur on our country's economic transformation. There is a palpable can-do spirit now in Ghana. People want to make a success of their lives, and hard work is coming back into fashion. There is a government in place that will provide the leadership needed to inspire. The deep attachment of the Ghanaian people to the principles of democratic accountability, respect for individual liberties and human rights, and the rule of law has ensured political stability. We have, in the era of the Fourth Republic, witnessed the transfer of power from one party to another on 3 occasions without shaking the foundations of the state. The separation of powers is now a real phenomenon in Ghanaian life, promoting accountable governance. The fight against corruption has gone beyond propaganda and is demanding of public officials higher levels of acceptable conduct. Efficient public services are now within reach. There are millions of Ghanaian youth who, given the opportunity, always excel. We intend to create the space for the private sector to grow the jobs that our young people need. I'm working towards building a Ghana that is working together to create jobs for her people and providing decent lives for its population. Ghana is endowed with great potential, where security and the rule of law are upheld, and where investments are secure. We want to participate in the global marketplace at the high end of the value chain for Ghanaian products. We want to bring greater dignity to the lives of millions of people in Ghana. We want to build a Ghana beyond aid. May God bless us all. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and welcome into the studio. It's a pleasure to have you here and drill down into one of the most vibrant economies in West Africa, as you've mentioned, in fact, one of the most vibrant economies across the African continent. And I want to go back to what His Excellency spoke of in terms of growth in 2016 being at 3.7%, in 2017 being at 8.5%, and forecast growth at 8.3% for 2018. I also want to just remind you of the timeline that Mr. President took position in January of 2017. So when we're scaling for impact, so a big turnaround of the Ghanaian economy, you have mentioned both power and business-friendly policies as tenets of that quick turnaround. For you, what has been the most important policy to come forward with in engaging the business community?
I think that the most important thing that we have been able to do in this last year is to assure the private sector in Ghana that we are there to assist them develop. I mean, there are a series of policies that have been implemented. Some of them I outlined in this speech, but I think that the most important is the constant appeal we're making to them to be up and doing, and that they have a government in place that is determined to help them grow. Whatever problems, we have a series of very systematic dialogue with Ghanaian industry, with the Ghanaian business community, and that has been the constant theme. We're there to support. We're not there to compete with the private sector. Projects are not coming into the government where government people will turn around and do it with their cronies. All of that is becoming a thing of the past, and it will stay in the past. So the business people, when they come to deal with the government, know that they're dealing with the government at arm's length. So yes, there's a series of specific measures, cutting the deficit. attacking the rates of interest, ensuring the stability of the currency, the tax reforms that we have undertaken. All of those are critical, and clearly, of course, ensuring that the era of doomsday, of the constant outages and erratic power supplies that wrought havoc on industrial and economic activity generally in Ghana, that has been put behind us, so that the businesses can now plan on the basis that they have secure electric supply at affordable prices. These are the gamut of possible, but I am very keen on the aspect that has to do with the confidence that the business community is getting, that there's a government in place that is there to assist business grow, expand, develop the economy, create jobs.
Well, again, if we are into facts and figures and monitoring progress, then just that economic growth ticking up from 3.5 to 8.5% in such a short period obviously is indicative of the right moves being made. You made a number of statements around building factories, and I like the way that you've taken this summit further and said scaling for impact, accelerating industrialization. 200 factories you are looking to build across the depth and breadth of Ghana. How are you doing on that front, sir?
It's the first year was spent in assessing something nearly like 1,000 business plans that were put before the Ministry of Trade, and they had to go through the process of looking through them and satisfying themselves on those that were really feasible in the business plans, and then linking up the promoters with the banking sector. Unfortunately, the Ghanaian banking sector does not have the strength and the resilience that really we need for it to have. And that has been somewhat of a stumbling block, but we're working on it to see how we can consolidate the banking sector so that we have banks in Ghana that have the capacity to do big business as against small businesses. But the long and short of it is that, yes, we're very much on course, and I think from now on we will see systematically the various projects across the country being rolled out. I'm hoping that by the time we have to go back to account the people of Ghana, they'll see that the promise that we made wasn't deceptive. We didn't do it to gain office, but we did it because...
Well, we'll be here to monitor you as CNBC Africa, so if you don't mind me saying,
no, absolutely.
We'll keep the checks in play. Having sat with a number of presidents across the African continent on stages such as the World Economic Forum in Davos, it's clear that there is a renewed sense of the right leadership, and perhaps we can talk about the chairmanship of the African Union. You mentioned the African Union in your speech. That has recently been taken over by President Paul Kagame, and you mentioned the one free trade area, which could transform, again, as you rightly said, intra-Africa trade, which has been beleaguered somewhere between 14 and 16%. Just talk to me about that sense of leadership that we're seeing and renewed optimism when it comes to that leadership across the continent, sir.
You know, we've had periods when that whole euphoria has developed in Africa before. But for me, I think that what matters is the concrete steps that are being taken in this period. I mean, for instance, the Continental Free Trade Area has been talked about for a long time. There's been a long process of trying to bring it up. But last year, those of us who had come forward and said, no, either we're going to do it or we're not going to do it. If we're going to do it, let's get on and do it, and not procrastinate and people finding excuses. There will always be excuses not to try something new. That we know it's a function of human existence. But if we really believe that there is a need for us to take place, let's get on and do it. And I think that sense of urgency, for me, is the reassuring thing that I've seen within the African Union. There seems to be a new dynamic. All kinds of different elements of coming in. We have, for instance, the anomaly that we had of an important economy like, say, Morocco, being outside the Union for years for reasons that were never clear to some of us. But anyway, it is being cleared. It is back there. And you're then talking about the impetus that is also given to the process of bringing the continent together to really address the key economic matters that have to be addressed. So, yes, I think we're getting to be in a good place. Let's cross our fingers and hope that it continues, and that the sincerity that so far that I've seen amongst the new leaders that have come on board in Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, Mohamed Barra, all of these, Alassane Ouattara, all of these people, that it will continue and that we will see the uplift that we want to see on the African
So let's go back to industrialization. I like tangibles when we're talking about Africa and African development, and Ghana being one of the world's biggest producers of cocoa. Your vision must now entail becoming one of the largest producers of chocolate. So where do we stand on that front?
Yeah, we're working on it. First of all, we've done something that had eluded us in the past. We are in the process of working out a very concrete arrangement with the Ivorians to work together to advance the cause of our farmers and of our economies, and thereby scale up our place in the value chain in the handling of cocoa. I think that's a very important step. For years, Ghana and cocoa and Cote d'Ivoire seem to be working, not necessarily at odds or even at cross purposes, but separately. There was no cohesion, there was no coherence in the policies of the two countries. Today, there's a clear understanding that we're going to work together to derive maximum benefit. And that is important because it means that it's difficult for anybody to play with one or the other, or play one against the other. The two leaderships, the two institutions in the industry, the Cocoa Marketing Board in our case, the CAS in the case of the Ivorians, are now working and meeting on a regular basis to fashion policy, and then look to the future of the things that we need to. It's not right. I mean, the figures that I've given you show that the present structure of the chocolate market and the cocoa market is just not right. People...
but we can look to you, sir, to change that.
Well, we're going to make an effort. They're definitely going to make an effort, yeah.
Just finally, again, coming back to the growth rates that Ghana is experiencing at the moment, the 8.5%, 2017, the 8.3% forecast by the IMF for 2018. I ask you, sir, as the head of an economy that has quickly turned around, what keeps you awake at night as you move forward?
I have to have some sleep.
I'm going to ask you just to... You are sleeping well, are you?
Oh, yeah, I try.
So can I lift could you?
No, yes, it is always to be about the economy, whether we're doing the right. And I think that really, for me, the most important lesson that I've learned this last year is the need for us to remain disciplined. Disciplined in our personal conduct as leaders, and disciplined in the manner in which we make and implement policy. Because I've seen that probably has been yet one of the most significant features of the turnaround. And now there is some discipline in the management of our public finances. There's some discipline in the way in which we're managing the economy. And that is what I worry about, that I hope that we don't slip and go back to the bad old days and bad old ways.